Most people live on a leash they can't see, pulled by emotions they don't understand, reacting to everything, mastering nothing. They wake up into noise and confusion, notifications, opinions, bad news, and call it life. But it's not life. It's stimulus. It's reactivity disguised as urgency. And the tragedy is not that they react. It's that they believe they have no choice. But what if you could build a mind so still, so sovereign, that no insult, no setback, no storm could break your composure? What if you could train your nervous system to remain calm when the world goes blind with panic? That's not fantasy. That's mastery. And mastery begins when you stop asking, how do I fix the world? And start asking, how do I stop being controlled by it? It's not the events that destroy you. It's your interpretation of them. Epictetus said it 2,000 years ago. People are not disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them. And today, psychology echoes the same. It's not stress that burns us out, but lack of control. What we fear most is not the future, but our inability to respond with clarity when the future breaks from plan. In the military, they call it command presence, the ability to hold steady under fire, to remain lucid when chaos erupts. This is not about being stoic in public and collapsing in private. It's about developing the kind of inner stability that does not require the world to cooperate with your preferences, because it never will. Your strength is not proven by dominance, but by restraint. The man who cannot choose his reaction is still a slave, no matter how successful he appears. The man who must shout to be heard has already lost his authority. But the man who does not flinch, he becomes a force, not because he's loud, but because he's unshakable. Not because he wins arguments, but because he doesn't need them. Think of Mandela, 27 years in prison, yet never a prisoner of hate. He emerged with vision, not vengeance. That is the kind of strength that turns history, because emotional self-mastery is not weakness, it's leadership. And leadership starts with the hardest command over your own impulses. This isn't about becoming numb, it's about becoming discerning. It's about choosing response over reaction, silence over noise, focus over frenzy. In a world built to hijack your attention, the refusal to be moved by every wind is not indifference, it is rebellion. And rebellion, when directed inward, becomes revolution. Revolution of mind, of emotion, of identity. And once you taste that power, the ability to walk through fire without screaming, to hear criticism without collapse, to move with intent while others flail with panic, you change. You no longer chase validation. You no longer need the world to understand. You begin to move from conviction, not insecurity, and from that place, everything in your life begins to reorganize itself around your calm. Calm is not an accident. It's not the gift of the naturally peaceful. It is built, layer by layer, moment by moment. It is the result of inner architecture, designed, tested, reinforced, like a fortress forged under pressure. And the foundation of that fortress is self-ownership. You cannot be unmoved by the world if you do not first reclaim jurisdiction over your own inner world. Most people lack boundaries, not because they're too kind, but because they've never defined where they end and others begin. So they absorb everything, people's moods, opinions, projections, as if these were facts. They mistake reaction for responsibility. But a boundary is not a wall, it's clarity. And clarity is the birth of freedom. Because once you know what is yours to carry, you can finally set down what never belonged to you. This is where emotional sovereignty begins, with distinction. The capacity to separate perception from reality, feeling from fact, urgency from importance. It is what cognitive scientists call metacognition, the ability to think about your thoughts, to pause the loop, to see the impulse arise and choose not to act on it, not out of suppression, but wisdom. That gap between stimulus and response is where your life is built or broken. It's easy to believe composure is about control, but it's the opposite. The strongest man in the room is not the one who controls everything. It's the one who no longer needs to, because he has shifted the locus of power from external validation to internal alignment. He doesn't need people to agree for him to believe. He doesn't need applause to feel seen. He doesn't need peace around him to live in peace. Modern neuroscience confirms this. People with high emotional regulation skills are not those who suppress emotions. They're those who integrate them. They feel everything, but they're not ruled by anything. They understand that emotion is data, not destiny. That anger may be valid, but not useful. That fear may be loud, but not wise. That discomfort may visit, but it doesn't get to decide. You train this through deliberate exposure, through what the Navy SEALs call stress inoculation, gradual, intentional practice of remaining steady under escalating pressure. Not by avoiding difficulty, but by walking into it with open eyes and a slow breath. Every time you hold your calm under fire, you rewire the mind. You create a new neural pathway, and over time that pathway becomes a trait. What began as a practice becomes a personality. This is not self-help. It's neuroplasticity. It's behavioral reinforcement. It's the principle that biology follows belief, but only when belief is made visible through disciplined action. The ancient samurai understood this. They practiced stillness not because they were pacifists, but because they knew that stillness sharpens decision. That reaction is a liability in battle, that the calm warrior strikes not first but last, and only when there is no other way. In a world that thrives on outrage, stillness is a weapon. You become untouchable not by building walls, but by deepening roots. You don't run from chaos, you stand through it. And in standing, you become the rarest kind of man, the one who can be trusted, not because he has answers, but because he won't shatter when others do. And once people sense that in you, they begin to move differently around you. The world adjusts to the energy you emit. And when nothing can shake you, you don't have to chase influence. It arrives uninvited. When nothing can shake you, everything around you begins to shift. Not because the world has changed, but because you have become the reference point. Most people orbit their reality around noise, news cycles, social pressure, fear-driven urgency. But when you stop reacting, you break the orbit. You become gravity. Look at Marcus Aurelius, an emperor at the edge of collapse. Plague, war, betrayal, constant unrest. And yet his meditations were not about the empire. They were about the mind. He understood what few leaders grasp. When the mind is still, the sword can stay sheathed. True strength is not in domination, it is in direction. And direction is born from quiet certainty. In psychology, this is called emotional contagion, the principle that emotions spread through groups like fire through dry grass. But there's a catch. The calmest person in the room sets the tone. Because calm signals control. And in a crisis, control is magnetic. We live in an age of reaction. Social media monetizes outrage. Corporations weaponize your attention. Politics sells fear. And people unaware become emotional amplifiers. But the man who does not amplify, who absorbs without distortion, who listens without losing himself, he becomes the rare signal in a sea of noise. This isn't philosophical poetry, it's behavioral science. In high-pressure environments, from elite sports to hostage negotiations, research shows that one regulated nervous system can co-regulate an entire group. Your physiology becomes instruction. Your body becomes message. When you exhale slowly while others panic, you're not just calming yourself, you're inviting them into your state. But to hold that space, you must earn it in private. You must build resilience when no one is watching, when the argument is tempting, when the trigger is fresh, when the ego wants to speak. That is the hidden forge where men are remade, not in grand decisions, but in microscopic refusals. Refusals to retaliate, to defend, to explain what needs no defense, to react just because it feels justified. The most dangerous emotion is not anger, it's righteousness, because it masquerades as truth. But calm is not the absence of truth. It is the presence of clarity. And clarity is what allows you to choose your battle, not be dragged into one. You will be tested. People will provoke you, not always out of malice, but because your stillness confronts their storm. Your discipline threatens their chaos. Your presence exposes their avoidance. And so, they will try to shake you, not because you are wrong, but because you are proof that another way exists. Hold the line. Because when you do, something rare happens. People begin to trust you without knowing why. They seek your counsel, not because you say much, but because what you say holds weight. Your voice carries because it comes from depth, not volume. And in a shallow world, depth is currency. But this is not for the faint. It is not about performance. You cannot fake composure. Stillness that is performed will crumble under pressure. Only stillness that is earned will hold. It is earned in practice, in solitude, in the discipline of letting 10 storms pass before lifting your hand. And when the time finally comes to speak, to act, to lead, you will not need to prove yourself. You will not need to convince anyone. You will simply move, and the world will feel it. Eventually, you come to understand that calm is not the goal. It's the gateway. When nothing can shake you, you don't just survive better, you begin to choose better. From your diet to your conversations, your work to your relationships, your calendar to your conscience. Everything starts aligning not with urgency, but with principle. You stop asking, what's the most, and begin asking, what's the most essential? You no longer move because others are moving. You move because you have studied the terrain, because you've sat with silence long enough to hear the signal beneath the static. And in that silence, you remember, you are not here to react. You are here to respond, with intelligence, with discipline, with grace. That is the difference between the man who lives on impulse and the man who lives on purpose. Purpose does not scream. It waits, it watches, it listens, and when it acts with precision. Because the man with nothing to prove can see further. He is no longer battling ghosts, no longer driven by the need to be seen, to be right, to be admired. He is driven by something deeper, alignment. Alignment between word and deed, between inner voice and outer action, between who he is and how he shows up, especially when no one is watching. This is the rarest form of leadership, not positional, but internal, not charismatic, but consistent, the kind that does not sway with opinion, the kind that can sit in a storm, hands still, eyes clear, and say, I know who I am. And when the day comes, and it always does, when everything you build is tested, when the noise gets louder, the pressure tighter, the stakes higher, and your old patterns beg for your return, you will hear them, but you will not obey them because you've outgrown them, because you've replaced them with something far more resilient, inner law. This is what the Stoics meant by virtue, what the Buddhists meant by equanimity, what warriors meant by the still point before the strike, what thinkers like Viktor Frankl meant when they said that freedom is not the absence of constraint, but the ability to choose your response within it. And yes, there will be moments when you falter, when emotion erupts, when your past wins for a second. That is not failure. That is the practice. Because mastery is not perfection, it's recovery. It's how quickly you return to clarity after chaos. And the more you return, the shorter the distance becomes. Until one day, you don't leave at all. You stay centered. Not because life is easy, but because you have become unshakable. And that is the turning point. Because once you are no longer shaken by fear, you can act from vision. Once you are no longer seduced by noise, you can move in silence. Once you are no longer ruled by emotion, you can lead with conviction. You become rare. You become steady. You become a man people can follow. Not because you pull them, but because your presence gives them permission to be still too. In a world addicted to reaction, you become the exception. And the moment you do, everything changes.